It's brilliant to be here and doing this keynote at the end of this day, and I hope you're going to find it sort of thought-provoking. As Julian says, I'm a sort of designer and strategist, but I've had a lot of experience in operations and commercial and operational management. I've had senior positions in some large companies. So I was on the leadership team of Pipex, which was a pioneering ISP. Up until January, I was group design director at Barclays. And I guess I sort of love integrating lots of different things, be it brand, customer experience, innovation, product design, all those kind of things. And I've recently founded a company called Door, which is a kind of business evolution consultancy. But as well as being involved in business and design and innovation, I'm, as Julian says, very interested in music. So Brainstruments is a project that I started in 2010, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So it kind of starts back in kind of 1988, and like lots of people, I was 18 at this point and listening to all kinds of music, into Public Enemy, The Smiths, all different types. But around that time, there was a bit of a blues boom happening in Europe. So you started to hear a bit of blues on the radio. Levi's used a Muddy Waters track and on an advert. So I started to listen to a bit of blues. And the instrument that seemed to sort of resonate with me more than any other was the harmonica. It wasn't the bass, it wasn't the drums or the piano. And one day, a friend sort of casually remarked that they'd seen this blues band that had a harmonica player in it, and maybe I should go and see them. So I was just listening to music, wasn't thinking about playing or anything like that. And I ended up following up this casual remark and suggestion. And so in October 1988, I went to this club called Gossips, and it's now on it's where the Dean Street townhouse is. So that site in Soho, which is now a very upmarket restaurant, used to be a very famous and important cultural club. So I walked into this club in the basement, and this guy was playing, who's called Howling Wilf and the VJs. And he's now just known as James Hunter, and he's one of the finest R&B singers the UK's ever produced. He's absolutely amazing. And at that time, he was playing a lot of harmonica. And when I walked into that club, the sky opened, a beam of light came down, and I was so moved, I had to go and start playing the harmonica. It didn't matter if I was going to fail or I couldn't do it. I was so moved by hearing someone play it, but importantly, seeing someone doing it live is so much more visceral than listening to it on tape back then. So I basically went and bought one the next day. I became totally gripped by the harmonica as I was by design. And I went on to tour all over Europe, Scandinavia. I made a couple of albums, played with some amazing musicians. I stopped touring around 2004 to focus back on my business career. And there's going to be various tangent alerts during this talk. And so I run a YouTube channel, which bizarrely has had over 1 million hits, and I have about 7,500 subscribers. And what's interesting is digital's effect on knowledge. And so when I was starting to learn to play the harmonica, knowledge was very hands-on. You had to get out there, you had to get your hands dirty. I would spend hundreds of hours listening to little phrases and winding it back. What's doing there? What's doing there? I would travel large distances to go and speak to other harmonica players to find out what they were doing. There was no YouTube. And what I notice on my YouTube channel, some of the questions that I get asked, is the way value is affected by access. And people will ask questions, oh, you know that thing you do, how do you do that? And knowing it is not the same as being able to do it. That knowledge has to be embodied. And people seem to be getting a completely different disconnection between how long it takes to actually be able to do something, and something that would take me 10 or 15 years of a lot of practice. People ask, how do you do that? And they've been playing a week And I think in the context of digital, is knowledge revered anymore? And do people appreciate it? But on the other hand, if I could learn to play like Jimi Hendrix, and there was an app that allowed me to do that, so I could play like Jimi Hendrix after 1 week, would I feel the same about it? Would I value it or appreciate it in the same way? And it was, I don't know where the gentleman's talk, who was from Us Too, rightly said, it's the journey as well as the destination. And especially with something like music, you never learn it all. But I think some of the things that I master on YouTube, I sometimes wonder where people are in relation to sort of craft and learning to master something. So I'm going to play you a little tune on the harmonica in a bit. Before I do, I think it's worth just pausing just to explain a little bit about the harmonica. It's such a wonderfully simple piece of technology, and I think about it as magic from something so simple. So it only has 3 parts, really. You have these outer cover plates. I'll get the screws off in a minute. And inside is a central comb, which is made out of plastic or wood or metal or even bamboo. So these are the cover plates. And then the central part, as I said, has this comb onto which are these reed plates. And the sound that you'll hear when I play is made by these tiny little bits of brass which are vibrating. And I think this is like a piece of magic, and we talk about iPhones and artificial intelligence, but this is old magic to me, that when I'm playing, it's just this tiny little bit of brass which is making the air molecules vibrate, and then the music happens in your head, which is something that I'll explain a little bit. So same thing there, just these tiny little bits of things. So, after I've been playing for about 15 years or so, I started to wonder why great harmonica players were so rare. So I would go to blues jams and there would always be plenty of good guitar players there. It was always the harmonica player who was like a bit dodgy. And it wasn't because those people weren't committed or they weren't trying. And I would go to harmonica workshops and meetups and harmonica festivals. Yes, harmonica festivals do exist. There's one happening this weekend, actually. And so I was really fascinated by this. And so I started to think about my own playing in a much more deeper way than I had before. And was thinking, why am I able to play in a certain way? And what I realized was that when I'm playing the harmonica, just a moment ago, and I basically made that up on the spot. There's certain things that I know I'm going to do, but it's kind of what happens, happens. I'm actually playing a kind of spatial arrangement in front of me, right? So it's not about here, it's about creating a sound through a spatial arrangement. So I started asking other people, how did they know, what they were doing? Or if they heard something on the radio that was a harmonica player, it was like, oh yeah, I know he's doing that because of this. Or if they have a musical idea, how they knew how to turn it into action on the instrument. And basically, people described this. No one could really articulate the same kind of spatial layout. And I thought everyone had that. Surely that's how everyone plays. And this was the sort of beginnings of this idea that maybe there was a correlation between the ability to have this kind of mental representation and playing standard. Then by accident, I read this book by Jeff Hawkins called On Intelligence, and I recommend everyone reads it. It's a brilliant book. So Jeff Hawkins founded Palm, and he now runs a neuroscience company looking into artificial intelligence. And reading this book made me realize that what I'd been wondering about was a neuroscience challenge, and it was all to do with perception and mental models. And I, as a designer, was kind of interested or aware of neuroscience around this time, but this really sort of pinged my interest, and I realized that was the center of it. So if you think about it, what I'd done is I had kind of designed my own UI for the harmonica, because if you look at the harmonica, there's not very much. It doesn't tell you what the mental model should be by interacting with it. There's very little clue there. And subconsciously, I hadn't realized, I'd been playing for 20 years before I realized I was doing this. I'd kind of built my own interface to fill in the blanks that are not provided by the instrument in the way that something like the piano does, the guitar does, the saxophone. There's a direct relationship to what you're doing. And then I thought, well, hold on, this can't just be a harmonica thing. Maybe this applies to other instruments. So how does a jazz vocalist, for example, play complex scales? They don't have something that they're manipulating. It's all internal. Where is C major, white keys on a piano, on a trumpet? You've got this metal tube and 3 buttons. How do you make sense of that? How do you play jazz on that? There's no clue. So I decided to take this on as a kind of bit of a project, and a sort of designer side of me said, let's do some ethnographic research. And I went on to interview about over 50 of the world's leading jazz and blues musicians, many of whom are my heroes. So people like Gregory Porter, maybe some people have heard of Gregory, Martin Taylor, just fantastic lineup of people. And I also spoke with some leading neuroscientists. Chris Frith, who embarrassingly for me is, so Chris is in the audience keeping me honest, and some brilliant people who are at the top of their field to do with music and cognition. I actually met Chris twice for an interview, because the first time I forgot to turn the tape recorder on. And I just we did a brilliant conversation, and then I realized I just wanted the floor to open up and just swallow me up and just disappear, but he graciously agreed to do it again. Yeah, that was not good. So I went into this project with a couple of sort of questions or hypotheses. So does the design of some instruments make it hard to build the mental model? Is there a correlation between playing standard and the ability for someone to articulate or talk about a mental model? And I wonder what these mental models look like in other musicians, if they can articulate them. So this is a quote from one of Chris's books called Making Up the Mind. And Chris is a pioneer around the work of how the brain works and how perception works, and mental models and their importance. So even if all our senses are intact and the brain is functioning normally, we do not have access to the physical world. It may feel as if we have a direct access, but this is an illusion created by the brain. And we often forget about this, and there are just some few really quick examples. There's lots of experiments which prove this is the case. Amazingly, although this is very well understood, it still knocks me out every time. So you don't see with your eyes, right? Your vision is put together for you at the back of your head. The visual cortex is at the back of your head. Light is falling on a flat retina, and this sense, the brain places you in the world and creates your vision, but it happens at the back of your head. Color. Colour does not exist in light frequency. It's a mental concept. It seems so real, but it's made by the brain. Same thing with music. So there's nothing musical in vibrating air molecules. It's a mental label. This is a quote from Daniel Letvitin, fantastic book. This is Your Brain on Music. Again, highly recommended, good read. So pitch is purely a psychological phenomenon related to the frequency of vibrating air molecules. By psychological, I mean it's entirely in our heads and not in the world out there. It is the end product of a chain of mental events that gives rise to a purely subjective internal mental representation of quality. So when I was playing, that music is not really happening out here. It's all translated in your head. You only receive a fraction of what your brain perceives. So this idea of our mental model being created by the brain, it kind of edits things, it leaves things out. So it's not just about being aware. So there's experiments around change blindness. So the gorilla experiment, everyone's probably familiar with that, the gorilla video, that's a good example. Chris told me about this fantastic experiment, which was done in 1998 by a couple of researchers. And essentially, a researcher would stop someone in the street and ask them for directions. While they were talking, two people would walk in between them with a door or a piece of wood. And the person who was asking directions would swap with someone else. And basically, under half the people recognized that they were then speaking to someone completely different. So your brain lies to you. So the implication of all this, those are just a few examples. When you play a musical instrument, you're not playing the physical instrument. Rather, you're playing your brain's mental model of that instrument based on inputs from your senses. And of course, as designers, it's not just a musical instrument. This applies to everything that we interact with. It could be a car, it could be a laptop, a piece of software, a service, a system, software and hardware. We have to produce a mental model of that to interact with it. Another tangent alert. So in 1978, a neuroscientist called Vernon Mountcastle suggested that the brain, with all its kind of wondrous capabilities, essentially runs on one algorithm. And Jeff Hawkins, who wrote that On Intelligence book, proposed that this algorithm is a kind of memory prediction framework, and that gives what gives rise to intelligence in the brain. And basically, this algorithm is predict, compare, error correct. So your brain is constantly making predictions about the world. It compares it with what it knows, and then it updates its mental model. That's essentially, if I've got that right, what's happening. Now, we see the rise of lean and agile product development and innovation, and we see this coming into how companies are organized, how company culture works. Everything's kind of moving to lean and agile because of various pressures around speed and so on and so forth. And lean and agile is around iterating and learning through build, test, learn cycles. So this trend is actually trying to get companies to mirror how the brain works. That's actually what's happening. This idea of a learning organization and doing iterative, make a prototype based on an assumption, test it in the real world, change that prototype, is exactly how the brain works, we think. I say we, I mean people like Chris think. Let's pause that for a second, hope that works. Right, so I'm now going to try and describe or show you a bit more about what my mental model is. And I've been working with a fantastic agency called Territory, who've worked on films like Prometheus and Ex Machina, Avengers Age of Ultron, and the founder is over there, David, thank you very much. And they've kindly quizzed me and drawn out this kind of mental model, which hopefully will bring it to life a bit more. So these are all the notes that are available on this harmonica, on the C harmonica. And this row here is if you just blow within a hole, and these notes here is if you breathe in on a hole. And you'll see there are a lot more notes there than just the act of breathing in and out. So one of the hard things about playing the harmonica is there's a lot of notes which are hidden, that can only be accessed through certain techniques. The other thing which makes the harmonica difficult is that as you move through an octave, so C to C is one octave, C to C is another octave, and so on and so forth, notes are not in the same place in each octave. So if you look at A is a bend on this hole, it's straight back here, it's diagonally back here. So it's like playing a keyboard. When you move into the next octave, all the keys have moved around. There's no replicable logic that you can keep using. So I don't actually really think about the notes when I'm playing. The notes kind of disappear, and it's about a series of regions and tones. So here I'm not really bending, and when I'm bending, they have a specific position in space. So this whole thing is kind of floating in front of me, and it's kind of real to me as holding something. So I can see this whole thing in front of me. And when I'm playing, I'm traveling around this shape in my mind. And so in effect, I'm kind of playing with like 3 levers, right? So I can imagine what it sounds like, I can imagine what it feels like, but I can see what's happening. Earlier, when I was speaking to other harmonica players about what you're seeing, they're effectively fumbling around in the dark. So if we take a G, which is on that note there, if I play that, it kind of comes out and it has a kind of form to it. Now if I play that note with a bit more intensity, or put vibrato on it, or make it a fatter sound or a thinner sound, or put more energy on it, it kind of changes form. So if I play it with more intensity, for example, as opposed to, it kind of takes on a kind of a different quality. It's kind of bigger, and it kind of shakes. And then if I think about a riff, something like this, that's just 3 notes. That has a specific shape and line as I activate each note. Sorry, I've missed a bit. So when I'm bending, that was a bend, those bends are in a specific position. This is the riff. So it has a shape and a line to it. So as I'm hearing and thinking about that sound, I'm actually thinking about moving in that shape. Similarly with scales. So if I play a scale, I can see that as a kind of shape and line. So as I'm playing, I'm moving through a kind of spatial object. So that's how I can translate my ideas into muscle movements which drive the physical instrument. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to share a few of the things that I found during my research with the interviews that I did with some of these musicians. The first thing is I did find a clear correlation between playing standard and the ability to articulate or talk about their mental model. So 95% of the professional harmonica players that I spoke to, I interviewed 15 of them, they all described some kind of spatial, visual representation in addition to the auditory and the physical kinesthetic dimension. Whereas only 25%, I thought it said 2 for a second, 25% of the amateurs did. So there seems to suggest a clear link between the ability to do that. I also found that there isn't kind of one model, you know, a right or a wrong answer. It's a very personal thing. So if you look at 3 singers, you've got Gregory Porter, who I mentioned earlier, American jazz singer, absolutely fantastic. Claire Martin has she OBE, MBE? OBE. And fantastic singer, and Ian Shaw, another UK fantastic jazz singer. So I met Gregory and interviewed him, and he talked about when he's singing, he sees notes as sort of clusters of stars, and he's moving. So making this move is based on going through a spatial arrangement, which is like stars. Claire Martin described a combination of kind of singing the piano. So instead of activating it with a finger, it's being activated with the voice. But then she kind of described this kind of big grid like a mail room, like loads of pigeonholes that you put things in. And if she wants a note, she goes to a specific spatial place. And if she's putting a series of notes together, which are higher and lower, that obviously produces a line. Ian Shaw described, so one of the things with Ian, he has a massive vocal range. And when he thinks about his vocal range in terms of tone, he thinks of it as a big block of wood. And at one end, it's like mahogany and sort of very dark, dense wood. And at the other end, it's light and like balsa wood. So when he's tonally, he's trying to think, what am I doing? How do I turn a concept or an idea into a physical thing? He uses this metaphor of where he is along this piece of wood to get that sound. So when you're watching a musician play, two trumpeters, two saxophone players, they're probably seeing very different things. Then I came across something very unexpected. So interviewing guitar players and saxophone players, piano players, one would expect that their mental model would replicate the design of the instrument. So you play a piano, you're going to visualize the piano keyboard. You play the saxophone, you're going to visualize the keys, right? You play the guitar, you're going to visualize the fretboard. But what I found was some musicians had substituted or created another UI instead of the one provided by the instrument, or they would switch between two different ones. So I'm delighted to welcome one of the world's best jazz guitar players. We're absolutely delighted. Please welcome Martin Taylor to the stage. Brilliant, Martin. If nothing else, just enjoy this moment. I'll be getting the bus.
I feel a little bit like Exhibit A here.
Yes, exactly. Terrific. And also just with the conference, it's like it's such a human thing. Just like a piece of wood and a very nice piece of wood, but metal. I just think it's such a amazing thing when you see someone who's developed a skill and a craft and all the emotion. So it's just amazing, amazing. So Martin, I'm tempted just to say, what's going on there?
Yeah, I know. It is.
So how did you get into the guitar?
Well, it's a funny thing for me because a lot of my students, one of the things I have to explain to them is that playing music has never been a hobby for me. That's the first thing. Because I've had some of my students say to me, they have a regular Monday to Friday job and they come home at night, pick up the guitar, and it's their way of switching off. And they say, it must be like that for you. And I say, no, it's the complete opposite for me. I pick up a guitar and I switch on. So I never, ever play the guitar to relax. Because once I pick it up, that's it. And most of the time, I'm actually practicing in my head anyway, without playing. So that's another thing that I've had to deal with over the years.
So in terms of, so when you're playing in your mind and you're away from the guitar, what does that sort of look and feel like?
Well, a number of things can happen. I mean, you've got three basic elements in music of melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic. So it might be a rhythmic thing. It might just be a feel that comes to mind, and then maybe from that something grows into a melodic thing or a harmonic thing, and those three come together. Then in my mind, I imagine. I can't imagine playing it. When I was a kid, my earliest memory is of actually playing a ukulele.
Okay.
My dad came home one day with a little ukulele. I was about 3 years old, and he gave, and I can remember it, and I can't remember anything before that. So I have no memory of not playing a stringed instrument. So he showed me a few things on the ukulele. Then I got interested and got a guitar. Then a terrible thing happened to me. I thought I was only going for the day, but my mum took me to school, and at the end of the day I thought, well, that's good, I'll go home now. And I didn't realise I had to go again for the next 10 years, 11 years. So I used to sit there, and I didn't want to be there at all. I used to look out the window, but what happened was I used to imagine playing the guitar and playing music.
So you're practicing in your head away from the instrument?
Yeah, and what would happen was during the course of the day, something would evolve, and then I would imagine playing it, and it wouldn't be like I'd sit there going like this. I would, as you said, it was that model.
Right.
There was this model going on. Yeah, okay. Okay, I can't play it in that key because I knew how the guitar worked, because I need that open string there, so I changed the key. And then I would say, well, okay, now if I change the key, then I can do this to it. And then I would go home, pick my guitar up and play a piece of music. My mum would say, I've never heard you play that before. How long have you been playing it? I said, first time I played it. My son, he's a genius. Look at that, it's incredible. It's incredible. But I'd played it thousands of times.
Right.
In my head.
In your head.
Another thing that I had, it came as a shock to me when I was talking to some other kids one day. I said, you know, when you've got this tune going on in your head, but you change it a little bit, and because you want to change the melody a little. No, because I thought everyone heard all this. You see, I didn't realise. Then sometimes my dad would put a record on, and I would listen to the record, and so I don't like the sax player on that. I wonder what it sounded like if Lester Young was playing that. And I would kind of when I was at school, I would put Lester Young on that. What it would be? That's a great band. If I play along to that, And I imagine myself playing, and I could kind of hear myself too. Actually, just a very quick, it's a true story, but it's quite funny actually, because it's about a musician that everybody's really heard of, Louis Armstrong. Now, I used to work with a trumpet player called Ruby Braff, and they were very good friends. And they used to meet up quite a lot when they were touring together in the States. And they both enjoyed a smoke. Okay. But Louis Armstrong was very, very famous for it. And I don't mean cigarettes. So they used to get together and they'd smoke pot all afternoon. And Ruby told me this story once. He said, you know, I can't believe it. He said, every time I hear you play, I've heard you play with really bad musicians, but you always play great. He said, and he's smoking away, and he said, how do you manage to do that? And he says, well, he says, if I don't like the band that's on the stand, I play along to the band in my head. So he says, okay. So they carry on. So after a while, Ruby says to him, who's in the band? And Louis said, I'm not telling you, get your own band.
Very good, very good. So when you're playing in your mind, or when you're improvising like you were playing a tune, can you describe the kind of if there is a visual things you know when we met, we talked about you described these shapes and spheres and things like that?
Yeah, very much something that happened, and I don't have it as strong now, but when I was younger, that's dark brown to me. That F major is brown, and a major chord is square. So as soon as I play that, and it's not something I developed, it's just what happens. I see a brown square. If I put a seventh in there, it's a brown square, but there's a little thing sticking out there. If I play a major seventh, it's the same thing, but that isn't sticking out there. It's a different shape there. If I play a 6/9 chord, there's two little like twin towers up there that I can see. Of course. I play a D minor, which of course is blue, navy blue. But a minor's a triangle, so that's a blue triangle.
So if you're playing a chord sequence of a 2-5-1 or something like that,
I mean, I'm not seeing flashing colours or anything. It's very smooth and subtle, but it's just really what's happening. Also, when I'm playing, because that tune I just played there, it's this style of guitar playing that I've developed over the years, which is actually based on piano playing, the left hand and right hand of the piano. So I'm playing basically three different things. I'm playing the melody. Now, the chords that are in there, I just think of the bass note, the root note. With the melody. That's my framework. I hear and see this framework, and I see it generally in this direction here. It's not an instrument as such, but it's a bit like a firework display, I suppose.
Okay.
That's going on. Are you with me? Then, because I have this structure and I have the intervals in between, I can then start to add to that. But then I can change that melody. So I've got three parts, but I can move them all around.
So it's a combination of the shapes, this firework display.
This firework display.
And you mentioned these spheres before about getting the different.
Yeah, and they're different shapes, and depending on how I hit the note and the tone I give it. Once I start playing, that shape becomes round. Then it becomes. Now I do something called internal dynamics. So if I play that, when I'm playing that melody, I'm playing the melody the loudest, so that sings out. I'm playing the bass note a little quieter, and the notes in between are quieter again. So this is the kind of dynamics. So what I see there, I see that melody closer to me. I then see the bass note behind that, and then those kind of wispy chords, I see them further away.
So there's a spatial relationship with volume.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Right.
So then it becomes a bit more complicated, because then when I'm seeing that brown square with the bit sticking out of it, but I'm seeing also that going on there.
And they're spherical. They're like spheres, or or is it just like a place in space?
It becomes fatter. If I play something mellow, it becomes kind of fatter, and the sharper it is, the flatter it becomes. So that's another thing, because I may play the bass note. I can change the tone of the bass note.
Right.
Just with the way I hit it, so I can play very soft. Now I can get it more toppy, more aggressive. Melody quiet.
So that's all changing over here.
I'm changing the dynamics on all three of those, and then when that happens, then the shape and the distance moves.
Right. So when we met and we talked about this, you hadn't really described it before.
No, the only thing, I used to get asked that all the time, and I said, when I got that question, when you're playing, what are you thinking? I go, oh no, I don't know, and because you can't say, well, I'm not thinking, because actually, I am thinking, but sometimes I can play, and then suddenly I'll think about, I really must move that plant in the garden when I get home. Something like that will come into my head. I remember I worked for 11 years with great violinist Stefan Grappelli. One night we were playing in San Francisco, and he suddenly went off into a tangent. Because normally I got to know him so well, his improvising, and he suddenly went onto this thing. I thought, wow, it went all over the place. And at the end of it, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm really sorry. I went off all over the place there. He said, the trouble is, he said, I suddenly started thinking about some curtains in my house. I said, well, that'll put you off. He said, well, no, it wasn't that. He said, I was okay at that point, but then I suddenly remembered I sold that house 20 years ago. and that's why he suddenly went into this other thing, because he was going into this other space. But when I'm asked that question, I would always say, well, I'm not really thinking anything. Well, are you? Because guitar players always talk about, the technical side of it. Are you thinking of this being played over that chord and that? And the thinking, it gets beyond the thinking process.
Yeah.
So the only best way I could describe, so when I really get into playing, the guitar disappears. I'm not conscious of playing. Now, when I started playing there, just a bit, I hadn't warmed up or anything. I started to play, and one of the things about practicing, I always tell my students, it's to do with connecting and reconnecting. Because I think when I had that little ukulele and the guitar when I was a kid, they were in my toy box, so they were just toys that I played with. I never had lessons. I've never had a guitar lesson. I never had a music lesson, and I just used to watch other people play and listen to records and try and copy it. That's how I learned. That's why I learned to play. So at that age, the same time I was learning to tie my shoelaces, I was also learning how to play a guitar.
Right.
So that's what I tell all my students. You've got to get to the point where playing the musical instrument is just a day-to-day function that you do. It's just the same as when you make a cup of tea. You don't go, yes, okay, now I get the kettle here and then I put water in it. You just do it. Or driving a car. At first you get in a car and you're thinking about everything. Eventually you just get into this mode. It's exactly like that playing a musical instrument. So when I started playing there, I would look at my fingers just to see where I was. But then after a while, then I could close my eyes, and then I was playing the mental model, the instrument that I've invented. That's going on over there, going backwards and forwards, different shapes, different colours.
Fantastic.
All going on. But at first, I had to kind of get into that, and then when I'm playing a solo concert or playing in a band, and I get into that, then I'm completely unaware that I'm playing the guitar.
You're playing the...
I'm not playing this at all. I'm playing that. And I will say this is just this piece of wood is kind of the loudspeaker to what's going on in here.
Brilliant.
That's really what is happening. This is the best way that I know of being able to just get a fraction, and it is only a fraction of what's actually going on in my mind, but I can do this. And what was great, and I'm indebted to you, because when we did that interview that time, you finally got all this information out to me. I thought, yeah. And I haven't stopped thinking about it ever since. And I think, yeah, that's what I do. And this was a number of years ago now, wasn't it? And what has happened since then is that when I'm playing, when I'm on stage, after I'm getting warmed up, I then really tap in to that instrument.
To the Brainstrument, yeah.
And I just play that. And what's happened is that I really know how to, I'm aware of it now, whereas I was a bit ignorant of it. I don't know, what do you think? Well, I'm thinking about curtains or I tap into that, and when I'm getting into something and I'm improvising as I was there and I get deep into it, then I'm just playing that instrument. I'm not playing this at all. Fantastic. And there was, it goes in and out, because sometimes you do have to refer back. Every so often you have to have a reference. So when I was playing there, you said, get up and play for about 5 minutes and do something. So I started reconnecting with the instrument, because at first you pick it up and it's just what it is. It's a big lump of wood and that you've got to wrestle with. But then once you reconnect with it and you settle into that, then I move away from that completely, and I don't play that at all. Brilliant. I'm not conscious of it. And there were moments when I drifted in and out when I was doing it. There were times when I was definitely just playing. I always point over there, because for some reason I always see it over there. I was into that and not playing this. But every so often I would refer back to it. Right. I don't want people to think I'm completely insane.
Everyone, Martin Taylor. Brilliant, amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Great, Martin, thank you so much. So I was really surprised by, when I first met Martin, about him. He plays the guitar, but the mental model he's using in his mind is actually very different to the guitar. And hopefully you found that I would probably overrun horribly, but it really gives you an insight into what's going on, but also how significant it's been to Martin's playing. And you see how amazing he is, but just the effect of being able to tune into that mental model has helped his playing, in a sense. Let's see, let's go this way. So, building on that point, 85% of the people I interviewed were like Martin and like me, in the sense that I'd been playing for over 20 years before I realised what was going on. Martin had been playing for 50 years before he really tuned into this mental model. So it shows that it's a deeply human, subconscious, deep-rooted mechanism for how we acquire skills. And even if the mind is not actively aware of it, this is how we make sense of the world. This is how we acquire skills. And Martin's developed something which is very different from the instrument, but it reflects his musical style. So when he talks about this dynamic volume control, there's nothing about the guitar which helps him create a way that he can conceptualize that and make that happen. So he's created this amazing firework display, sphere shape thing, which lets him bring his the musical style he wants to deliver to life. So just to sort of sum up this idea of a brainstrument, when you play a musical instrument, you're not playing the physical instrument. Instead, you're playing your brain's mental model of that instrument based on perception built from your senses. I call this model a brainstrument, and a musician's mental model is more than a representational and enablement framework. The mental model is the instrument. So what are the implications? Well, for music, I think the implications are quite profound. So in terms of education, this idea of creating a mental model is not really sort of actively taught. I think there's something around instrument affinity. So I would not be able to play the harmonica to the standard that I do without the ability to create my own UI. Now, because I'm a visual person, I'm into design and aesthetics and so on and so forth, I'm predisposed to be able to do that. Whereas if I wasn't wired in that way, I would probably really struggle to play the harmonica. But because I'm visual, it became naturally in my subconscious. It's not something I set out to do. And I also think there's a potential for a new language between musicians. Hey man, what's your mental model? What's your brainstrument? And there's different ways of sharing ideas. But what are the implications for designers? And I think this has cropped up in a few talks today. So our experience is a continually updated mental model. It's central to how we experience the world and how we acquire skills and do things. Now we're entering in a new era of kind of intelligence everywhere, autonomous cars, new types of services which are going to break down a lot of the existing principles that we're used to. So in the way that, if the last generation struggled to program a video recorder, the next era could be really something. So what should the mental models be for these kind of new services and these new environments? Now, one of the strategies is going to be managing this complexity with adaptive and dynamic UIs and interactions based on machine intelligence and the fact that it knows you. And maybe there'll be no UI at all. We already see a lot of services being accessed via chat, and eventually the UI will disappear. But will that reduce the way that we're using our brain? If we outsource and delegate all this activity to algorithms and technology, in this kind of man creates technology, technology shapes man paradigm, what happens if we diminish or lose our ability to create these mental models, to do what Martin is doing, is to say, oh, right, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to overlay that, because now we're outsourcing, delegating more and more things of what we do to machines and technology. And our ability to create these mental models is one of the things which makes us human. So the final thought is, if that is diminished, do we lose an essential part of our humanity? Thank you very much.